Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first EQ Advantage interview program. Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing great too. This is a very interesting, an interesting technology phenomenon. Everything on Facebook Live is just a little delayed, but I do see people are joining us. Hello, Bobby. Good to see you. So first of all, before we get into introductions and all, please, if you're joining us live, tell us in the chat where you're joining us from. And if you're catching this on replay, put hashtag replay, because we want to make sure that we say hello to you wherever you join from. My name is Alan Samuel Cohen, and I am a leadership and team coach and the proud founder of the EQ Advantage, which is various programs and Facebook groups, all in service of helping people deepen their understanding and practice of emotional intelligence. EQ stands for emotional quotient. And this, I am so proud to say, is our very first EQ Advantage interview program, the first of a series where I get to interview inspirational men who are leaders in their communities, who are up to something big in the world. And I am super delighted to introduce Stephen Strother, or Steve, we call him Steve today, who is joining us to talk on his topic, which is the widening gap between men and women when it comes to personal and spiritual development, and why men should be concerned about it. So Steve, did I get that title right? I know we changed the topic, but is that the right one?
You did, yeah, that was great, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me, before we forge into the topic, let me introduce you, Steve. So Steve is a relatively new friend of mine. He's a participant in our EQ Advantage group program and very active in our EQ Advantage Facebook community. And Steve is a lifelong learner and lives to support that mantra. He believes that successes and failures are vital to our growth and learning opportunities. And he says he's got certainly many to share about. He has a passion for helping men live better lives in deeper connection with peace, joy, and their own inner strength. And prior to starting Finding Men's Peace, which is his company, he found traditional success in a 20-year corporate sales career that was highly demanding of his time and energy, but it taught him the interpersonal communication skills that he uses in coaching today. Welcome, Steve, to the kickoff program of the EQ Advantage.
Absolutely, thank you. Thanks for having me, Alan. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. And Steve, where are you joining us from? What part of the country are you
in? Charlotte, North Carolina.
Good old Charlotte. Well, how's the weather in Charlotte today?
Cloudy, a little windy. We're getting a little bit of the fringe of the hurricane that's coming up the coast.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, right. Nothing major yet. I don't think we're going. I really haven't looked at the weather, to be honest, but I know it's out there and I can see it. So.
Well, hunker down and stay safe. We've got people joining us here from New Jersey and all points up and down the East Coast and all around the country.
Yep. Awesome.
So Steve, tell us. So you are a men's spiritual coach, and I think people would be very interested to hear a little bit more about a little bit about your journey from sales guy to men's spiritual coach, and things that we don't know about you from that brief bio that I shared. So why don't you enlighten us about your journey?
Sure. Yeah. Great. I'd be glad to. I first started into the idea of coaching when I joined an online entrepreneurial group like 7 years ago, and part of their program was coach training. So I trained to become a coach, not necessarily looking for that, but it was part of the program, so I did it, and so it went well. And then a couple years later, I started. So I ended up having a lot of friends that were coaches. And a lot of them were women, And I started seeing a lot of women coaches posting about these great programs they were putting together. And I'm reading through them. I'm like, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sign up. And I get to the bottom of the announcement, and it says for women only. And so that's what at first became a frustration for me, is that there all these things that are being offered, and they're all for women only. And so I actually reached out to one of them that I knew pretty well. And I'm like, wow, this looks really good. I wish I could join. And she's like, yeah, I know. I see the need for this for men too. But she said, I don't feel like I'm qualified to help men in that way, because I can't relate to these things in the way that a man probably would. And so that's when I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And that's when I actually started feeling, first of all, glad that women have that, all those opportunities out there, and they're getting together and helping each other. And I realized, well, there need to be men out there doing this too. And I've got training as a coach, and I've had this entrepreneurial spirit for a long time. I've also had this feeling like a calling that I was here, that I was really here to help people grow spiritually. Although at that time I really didn't quite know what that meant, and that's an ongoing growth life experience anyway. So it all kind of came together that way, as far as how I got into coaching, and that's a part of the story. What ultimately happened is I got more and more interested in the thought of coaching men, but I felt more and more disconnected from the ability to do that because of the demanding career I was in. I was traveling a lot, lots of hours per week on the road, and working that job. So it actually took two big things happening in my life in 2019. One was going through a divorce, which started at the beginning of that year, and then being laid off from that job in November of 2019, and that was the real catalyst to moving me into this what I'm doing now, as a men's coach, because I'm like, after about a month of being unemployed, as I'm thinking it through, it just became more and more clear that this is the time for me to do this. I walked through a series of exercises with one of my own coaches that just led me to the realization that now is the time. This is the time to become that men's coach that I've been thinking about for years. So
That's great. That's great, Steve. Well, I love that you're talking about the how many groups there are out there for women, and and how few there are really for men. And I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about the differences between men and women, and beyond just biology, and in terms of spirituality, in terms of community, and all those things. So, but before we do, one of the tagline for this series of interviews is real men, real conversation. And I got some interesting responses from friends of mine asking what they thought about what was a real man anyway, and grunting and groaning and carrying a club was what they were teasing me about. But I'd love to, and I'm asking each man on this program to share what you think, how you would define what a real man is in your way.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start out with what sounds like a really PC answer, because in my definition, a real man is anyone who identifies as a man, and anyone who identifies as a man, regardless of what it is that they're doing, regardless of how it is they identify as being a man, etc. And here's the reason I say that. One of the big things I work with men on is that looking at that perception of the stereotypical masculine, or the stereotypical man, and it's actually one of the things that hurts men the most, is looking at the stereotype of what men are, or the stereotype of what it makes you feel like men are supposed to live up to that stereotype. And it's that stereotype is basically unobtainable, for the most part, at least for most men. and it's probably not. I mean, for the most part, is not even beneficial. So again, so most men aren't going to be a Rambo. Most men aren't going to be a superhero, because that's kind of the stereotype. And so that's why I say whatever anyone who identifies as a man is, that's a real man. To go a little further with that, what I help, one of the things I help men with is connecting to basically sacred energies. There's sacred masculine and sacred feminine energy. And so that can help a man really become a real man too. Basically, they're already doing it a lot, and it's just they're not realizing it. I also think men don't think of themselves as sacred or divine very often, but they have access to those sacred energies just like women do. So I mean, just a couple of examples would be things like taking action, discernment, holding space, intuition, so being dialed in intuitively, compassion, creativity, things like that. So
yeah, I love this, Steve. You're talking about the energies and the interestingly enough, a coach of mine was encouraging me this week to explore my yin energy, because I've been noticing that I'm really not in this space right now of like trying to crush goals and hit it hard and push myself. And she invited me to just really think about, just sort of exploring more of the yin energy and more of those things that you were talking about, and then bringing in the yang energy too where necessary. But it's been a really fun exploration of those other sides of myself. So thank you for sharing your definition.
yeah.
I'd love to just really dig into the topic. I asked you to come up with a topic that would really excite you, and you came to me with this idea of the widening gap between men and women when it comes to personal and spiritual development, and why men should be concerned about it. But before we even do that, I'd love for you to share your relationship to spirituality, and how you define that for yourself, to the extent that one can define spirituality.
Sure, right, absolutely. It is. It's a challenging thing to define, and everybody, basically probably has their own kind of definition of it. But for me, spirituality is having a focus on something other than yourself, and specifically realizing that, and focusing on a higher power. So you can call it God. You can call it higher power, God, the universe, spirit. Etc. I mean, so, but having that focus on that higher power, realizing it, and so for me, my belief is that not only is there a higher power, but that higher power is in everything. So that higher power is part of us. That higher power is part of everyone around us, everyone in the world, part of everything. You look out the window and the things you see out there. And so connecting spiritually to me means connecting with that higher power inside yourself, connecting with that higher power inside other people and other beings, and connecting with that higher power, at that higher level as well. So yeah, I see, a lot of times we focus on the higher power as that big being that's inaccessible. However, that higher power is part of us too, and so we can connect to that higher power through ourselves, through our heart, through our connection with other people. That deeper, bigger meaning of the word love that goes beyond romantic love. That's spirituality. That's a spiritual component of spirituality. So yeah.
What I love, and I'm encouraging anyone who's listening in right now to follow Steve on his Facebook page, or I'll let Steve share all of his social media tags later. But Steve, you do a beautiful job at taking people on the spiritual journey with you, and sharing the videos of your walks in nature and your running and all the different things that you do to help you be more connected. And it's really just you see the joy and in your own spiritual exploration. So
Yeah.
so viewers, please connect with Steve around that.
Cool. Thank you.
So you're welcome. So let's talk about this gap, all right? This gap that exists between men and women when it comes to personal and spiritual development, and really what how you've come to that realization or that awareness. What are you seeing out there?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot here. And actually, there are a lot of ways and a lot of places that you can look and see this. So I'll start with some basic things and then work my way up. But so one is, first of all, you just see, women are getting together and supporting each other a lot more than men are. So, and that is part of it. When women have something on their mind and they need help with something, or even when they don't, but they're just ready to talk about something, they have a support. Most women have a support network already in place. That's been my experience. Most men don't. So most men, there's a lot of the lone wolf syndrome in the world of men, where we as men try to face everything head on our own, and we don't ask for help. And you see that everywhere. You see it. Men don't like asking for directions. Men don't like going to the doctor. Men don't like talking and being vulnerable, and they especially don't like being vulnerable around each other. And it's funny because, well, I don't know if funny is the right word, but while that's the case, the number one thing men can actually do to break stress and do their own types of self-care is to have good, solid friendships with other men. And so that's where it starts. And that's where I see the gap starts too, is that men just aren't out there connecting to a lot of other men. Hopefully we all have a best friend or something like that, but we don't have a lot of friends, and we don't feel, and even with our best friend, in my experience, for most of my life, most of those conversations were at a pretty superficial level. We were talking a lot about sports. We were talking a lot about whatever beer we were drinking or whatever. I mean, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Nothing wrong with those at all. But I just started having, and it was part of what led me to wanting to work with men, is I started having this craving to talk with men about deeper things, to find men that I could talk to about spirituality and the challenges that I was facing in my life. So that's where it begins. And then you can look at things like yoga. So I'm doing, I go to deep stretch yoga class once a week. I was doing it actually in a class, here locally, up until the pandemic started. Now that class is offered virtually. So when I go to a yoga class, I'm usually the only man in the class. So there might be 10 people in the class. I'm the only man. At most, I've seen out of maybe 12, I've seen 3 men out of 12. So that sounds like, well, yoga's not, some people would say yoga is not spiritual, but it is. It definitely is, especially deep stretch yoga, and especially the way my yoga instructor teaches it. There's always this learning component of how to apply the concepts of yoga to your life outside of the yoga studio. Your life off the yoga mat is how she refers to it. And so, that's a big thing there. There are a lot of women out there doing yoga and not very many men. And you could say, well, I think some people would say, well, yoga is just, it appeals more to women, and that could be true.
Yeah.
But what are men doing in place of it? And I can't name anything, we might get together. Some men might get together and go running or things like that. And there's some spiritual piece to that, but men in general aren't doing as much from a personal development and a spiritual development standpoint. And that's one of the things that points to it.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, Steve? What do you think is in the way of men exploring more of their spirituality and pursuing some of the things that you've mentioned?
Good question. A lot of it has to do with how boys and men are raised or brought up. And it's not, I don't really like to say raised, because some of it's on that family relationship, but a lot of it's on how society treats boys and men when they're, in school, or at work, et cetera. So I think pretty early on, we get uncomfortable as as boys and then men, with anything that feels vulnerable, with anything that feels like it's not macho. So yoga doesn't really feel macho. So a lot of men don't want to do it because, oh, that's what my wife does. That's what all those women do. And they don't feel comfortable with it. So I think it's a vulnerability thing. I think it's also there's a lot of emotion connected with spirituality too, and in general, men are uncomfortable with anything that relates to emotion too,
Yeah.
and for the same reason. It's because of how society, to this day anyway, has brought boys and men up as far as feeling like emotions aren't good, etc.
Which is a lot of the work that we do in our emotional intelligence trainings that you participate in. But I guess I'm curious what you think is the consequence of men not being as spiritually connected and not being more vulnerable. What do you think? What do you think is at risk there?
Yeah, there's a lot at risk. First, because of the gap, so because women are doing a lot more of that work, that affects relationships between men and women. So there are a lot of situations out there now where the woman in a relationship um, is moving beyond where the man is spiritually, and at some point she's going to get to a point where she's so far ahead, and if the man isn't willing to do anything, that relationship's going to it's going to fall apart. Because you can't. It's kind of hard to stay together in a romantic scenario when someone starts moving way past the other one from a spiritual or personal development standpoint. Um, so that's one. Another is it has effects in careers and at work, and especially now. So yeah, as more and more women are in the workforce, and as kind of the traditional male or masculine way of approaching work starts to fade or not be as strong. So women are bringing things to the workforce like creativity, like intuition, things that are more on that feminine energy side, even though men have access to that too, but they're not used to it. They didn't grow up being connected with that creative side in a lot of cases, or they didn't grow up feeling intuitive, feeling like they had a good connection with their intuition. It's going to get harder for men to be as productive at work because they're not bringing a lot of the equation that's needed to the workplace either. I think that's going to be more and more the case. I think, especially when you look at things like what's happening now in the world with the pandemic, we have to be more creative because our old ways of doing things aren't working anymore, because we, at least for now, we can't get together as much as we were. But it's more than that. Um, you know, so yeah, that's a big piece of it, though. I mean, I think the pandemic's bringing that up. It was happening already, but the
Yeah.
pandemic's bringing it up even more. So
Yeah, no, I've been thinking a lot about the pandemic right now and what the world is experiencing. And so this conversation is very timely. And because my question for you is, how does or how can spirituality, a greater spirituality, greater spiritual connection help us through these very, very uncertain and challenging times? And more specifically, what have you found to be most helpful, um, pulling from your spiritual practice to help you get through the chaos and the uncertainty and the
sure,
challenges?
sure, right. Yeah, a couple of things. One is, because of that spiritual connection, I just have this strong feeling, strong intuition, um, as far as how I look at things. And one is, I look at everything, there's a reason for everything, and so this pandemic, there are reasons for why it's happening, and it's bringing, while definitely, there it's tragic in a lot of ways, and I'm not discounting that. It's bringing a lot of things forward that really needed to be brought forward, and that's part of it. Let's, rather than, I think we as humans, and especially, I mean, I know the Western world better because I live in the Western world, have focused on the hustle and the taking action and really overproducing. If you really look at it, for so long, like, we valued overworking, to a point where we're all stressed all the time, and we miss a lot of life because of that. This pandemic has slowed that down, and so now we have a whole lot more time to um, to evaluate. I'm looking for the right word. Evaluate's part of it, but yeah, to reflect, evaluate, and explore. And I explore, personal development, explore, spirituality. A lot of us, I mean, all of us to some degree, are being put in places where we're facing fears that have probably been there for a long time, but we've been able to push them back, and now we can't. And then facing those fears helps us grow, in life, and grow spiritually also. So, there was that. There was something else, but it slipped my mind. But yeah, it'll probably come up a little later. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a friends of mine created a Facebook group, which you guys are all welcome to check out, called "The Power in the Pause," and
yes,
people sharing really, like, what are they doing to be more present, to learn more about themselves, to deepen their connection. What are the opportunities that have come from these very difficult times? And it was really interesting to hear people, finding the gift in what's difficult, and that's I think it's a useful way to reframe our experience right now.
absolutely. And I thought of the other one, and the other one is, um, the the what's happening, and this isn't just because of the pandemic. This started before the pandemic, but the pandemic is really bringing it forward, as are other things that are happening. Um, and that is, we're really at a point right now where there's so much information available, and I actually have a master's degree in library science, so I'm actually really, into information, at its best. I mean, I believe in having information and having access to information, but I got my master's degree in '95, so a lot's changed as far as how information is provided, since 1995, and with the internet and with the growth of the, social media and all that. There's so much information out there, and it's so easy for people to put false information out there and make it look true. Yeah, it's absolutely like, trying to drink water from a fire hydrant or whatever. There's so much information coming at us all the time, and it can just, completely overwhelm us. And it's really like traditional sources, what we always thought of as traditional sources of authoritative, accurate information, are harder and harder to trust now. And so what that's doing is and I've had this conversation with several different friends, is that it is putting more emphasis on our ability to trust our intuition, which is pretty amazing, because actually, when you think about it, when you think about the whole history of the human race, up until pretty recently, we really had to trust our intuition, like, as the number one way to survive. And as we learned how to survive, then it became knowledge. But now we can't fall back on those traditional sources of what we always thought of as authoritative information. We're having to dig deeper into our own intuition to decide how to live, and that's actually spiritual, because relying on your intuition, you're relying on your gut, your heart. That's your connection to that higher power.
Yeah.
So.
I want to pause you just quickly, because it's a great little promotion for the 4:30 live that we're doing with our friend Zach Subar, talking about about really how sometimes there's a benefit in staying in your comfort zone and trusting more of your intuition rather than constantly swinging for the fences or pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, which is often what we're told we need to do. So sometimes our intuition is powerful and is saying, no, it's okay to actually stay safe and stay within our comfort and sort of push, sort of explore the crevices of our own comfort zone. So thank you. So 4:30 today, we're going to have that conversation.
Yeah, awesome.
Steve, we're at the half-hour mark, and first I want to make sure if anybody has questions, please be posting your questions. We want to answer all of your questions, and I'm going to be looking at the comments throughout. But this is a great opportunity for you to talk about you have 2 different programs, and I would love for you to share with our audience those programs and maybe highlight a few of the interesting features of both of those.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I am a spiritual life coach for men, and the name of my business is Finding Men's Peace. My website is peacefulmen.com, and so the 2 programs that I am highlighting right now, the first is called the Finding Inner Strength Fellowship. It is once a month we get together as a group of men. It's a membership program, and I teach on a topic that helps men build inner strength and resilience. Last month the topic was holding space. This month is discernment. A couple of months ago it was taking action. So basically, but the point is, we spend a lot of time thinking about and doing things that help build our physical strength. Everybody can think of right away of something they could do to help build their physical strength, whether it's running, lifting weights, anything like that, exercise. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking, or at least talking about, how to build resilience and inner strength. And actually, it's more important in this world now than physical strength is. We don't have a lot of situations where our life depends on our physical strength anymore. We have a whole lot more situations now where our life depends on our ability, or at least our quality of life depends on our ability to have that inner strength. So I teach on a topic every month that helps the men that join the call, and it's a Zoom call like this, learn the areas of their life, the energies they can bring in and focus on that help them build inner strength. So that's a once a month call. And then the second offer that I'm working on, or not working on, but I have that I want to focus on today is my Path to Peace group coaching. I'm launching the next cohort of that, or the next pod of that, in middle September, so September 15th. And that is actually for men that do that. Those are men who want to go beyond learning about the topic, and they want to actually look at that topic in their own lives and get coaching around it. And so whereas Finding Inner Strength offers the ability for men to learn how to build their inner strength, the Path to Peace focuses on the same topic. In fact, they join the same Finding Inner Strength call every month, and then they have a second call with me a couple of weeks later. So this month, the topic's discern. Well, yeah, if I had the group coaching pod going on this month, they would go to Finding Inner Strength, learn about discernment, and then for 2 weeks, they would look at discernment in their own life and where their strengths are and where their challenges are with discernment. And then they would come to the group coaching call, and I would coach them around what their challenges are. And the nice thing there is they learn from my coaching, but they also learn and grow from the other men in the group. So that's the nice thing about group coaching is you start to learn that, hey, I'm not the only one that's feeling this way. I'm not the only one that's having this challenge, and you're able to start bouncing things off of each other. So
great, and we'll put the links to your information in the comments later, to make sure that people know how to reach you.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve. So I wanted to. So we're talking about challenges and about resilience, and I'd love for you to share some of the hard stuff. I said this is real men, real conversations, right? So let's get real here in our last few minutes. What have been some of your greatest life challenges? and what have you learned about yourself and going through them that can then maybe help others who are in similar places right now?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So my biggest life challenges, I definitely divorced. So I've been divorced, been married and then divorced twice. And also that job loss, being laid off in November, those would be two big things: divorce and then job loss. So there is that, but and really even bigger than that, I have always had I've always been a pretty anxious person. So I've had a lot of anxiety, and there have been a couple of points in my life where it got to a point where I was full blown panic. And when that happens, for those that are familiar with it, it's not just one time little panic attack. It's when it really hits you, it affects you for months, like, and you just never know when it's going to happen. Learning, basically learning to move out of that place of high anxiety to the point of panic was a big challenge for me. And I'm 52 years old. The first one happened when I was 24, and then the second period happened when I was 33. So it's been almost 20 years since it has been. I was 32. So it's been 20 years since I've been at that level of anxiety, but I felt anxiety a lot since then, just not to the point of panic. So the interesting thing there is, last fall, I'd say the last couple of months before I was laid off, I was at a really high level of anxiety. Like, I was not sure. I was feeling some of the symptoms that would lead to panic attacks. Unfortunately, I know the symptoms, and that helps. That would always help me not get to that place of panic. But I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to hold it off. And then I got laid off. Talk about something that causes anxiety. But here's the interesting thing. I went through that period of reflection for about a month, and then I decided to start a new business, which there's a lot of anxiety around that too. Then a pandemic, things like that. So starting a new business in a pandemic, but the anxiety is not there anymore. And here's the reason. The reason is that I'm finally connected to my meaning, to my calling. There are pieces of this that have been my calling for forever, for as long as I've been alive. And finally being connected with that, not separated from it, moving into that place where I can be connected to it. It was the secret to breaking through that anxiety. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. I think that message is so important right now. I know that there are a lot of people, men and women, who are tuning in, who are dealing with incredible stress and anxiety right now, maybe for the first time. And so you're sharing that optimism and optimistic perspective is really helpful. A spiritual connection is going to be the thing that's going to get many people through this unimaginably difficult time. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
Steve, we have a few minutes left. What's a question you wish I had asked you, or something that you feel is important to share with our audience?
Sure. I guess I'll go with, I think, sometimes it's challenging to know where to start when you're feeling stressed out, when and you might not be thinking, oh, I need that bigger, deeper spiritual connection right away. So I guess the thing I would share, maybe the thing that I wish you had asked or something, is that the starting point for breaking through that stress and that cycle of stress, because we all feel it to a certain extent. I think it's pretty common that a lot of us, men and women, feel it pretty heavily in our lives on a daily basis. The first key to breaking stress in your life is to look for ways to take care of yourself. Again, as adults, and especially once we have families, we tend to focus on other people a lot, but we can't really fully focus on someone else until we're doing things that help ourselves and break that stress. So that self-care, and men don't think about self-care a lot, but anything we do that helps our own well-being, so that then we're more present for our loved ones too. is key. And so I talk a lot about that with the men that I work with too, things that men can do. Like, I mentioned one, the big one is those getting together with other men, having really solid friendships with other men. But other things like um, hobbies, finding that hobby that really brings you peace and calms you down, so that when you're done, you walk away with it, you're able to connect with your family more. So yeah, so and you're more present with your family because you're in that more joyful, that more calm and peaceful place. So I always recommend looking for ways to take care of your own well-being, kind of that, the putting the mask on first, you're on yourself first on an airplane. Do that in your everyday life too, So yeah.
What are some of the resources that you'd like to recommend to folks who are maybe beginning on a spiritual exploration, or things that you're reading right now that you think people would get something from?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. For men that are really looking to explore, especially how can they connect to the like sacred masculine and feminine energy, but especially the key mature male archetypes. There's a book called King Warrior Magician Lover that I highly recommend. It's really where I started my journey when it comes to really understanding how to connect with those masculine archetypes in their fullness, because we all have access to all four of those archetypes at all times, all of us, women and men, but they're going to be stronger for the most part in men. And we have access to them in their fullness, or the sacred pieces of them, but we also have access to the shadow side of them too, and those move in and out of our lives. So that book really helps with understanding how that king energy comes into our lives at times, and how the magician energy comes into our lives at other times, and how we move back and forth between them a lot of times on a daily basis, and how the fullness, the sacred side of them, and the shadow side of them kind of move in and out of our lives too. And there's not absolutely anything wrong with the shadow side, especially as long as we recognize it, and then we look for ways to maybe move more toward the sacred side as much as we can. So that's the one I'm recommend first. What I'm reading right now is there's a book David Deida does, and Deida spelled DEIDA. He does a lot of he's done a lot of work, written a lot of books on men and really moving into that more spiritual side of the masculine. And I'm reading a book called The Way of the Superior Man, which is really, really interesting. A lot of key points there that I recommend. And then the next book on my list is called I Don't Want to Talk About It, and it's by Terrence Real. And it's basically about the things that lead to depression in men, and how we can talk about those things, and therefore by talking about them and being vulnerable, we can move past them and learn from them. So the key point there, and everything really in this conversation is, and we've talked about it before, is those things we call setbacks, and even on my website and in my bio, when I talk about failures, they're all things that we can learn from. And I think, Alan, you're the one that mentioned this in one of the group calls that we've had, is that really that setbacks are what we learn from. That's how we learn, is through those kind of setbacks. So anything that it feels like a setback or a failure is a learning opportunity, and that's spiritual growth right there.
Beautiful. Hey, Steve, why don't you just let folks know how they can get in touch with you if they've got questions or want to talk to you about coaching or any of your programs?
Absolutely. The best way to get in touch with me is through my website. And that website is peacefulmen.com. And you can, from my website, reach out by phone or via email, or via commenting on the forum. So that's the number one way. And of course, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. So
Well, and before we sign out, I just want to invite all the men, sorry ladies, all the men who are tuning in. If you are a male coach or solopreneur or leader, come on over to the EQ Advantage Facebook group, where we are hosting lots of powerful conversations like the one that I just had with Steve. And tune in later today at 4:30 for a conversation about staying in your comfort zone and why that can be a good thing, with my pal, Zach Subar. Steve, thank you again so much for being our first interview. And I know that you've inspired a lot of folks today, and I really appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to be here.